Association signed on to the no ballot, the no argument. And in their argument, they said, well, if this passes, any doctor can make a recommendation for any condition. And the Attorney General at that time, who later ran for governor and was defeated, Dan Lundgren, agreed with that position. However, as soon as this passed, they said, well, we were only joking about that. We didn't really mean that. We question whether or not these people have the right to recommend this for anything, or we question whether they have the right to recommend it for anything except people that have the most serious kinds of conditions. And we think that the documentation should be done down to a gnat's eyelash. So there's been a lot of backing and filling on this issue. So when the new Attorney General was elected, he called together a group, a committee that he had appointed, I think of 50 people, half law enforcement, half medical. They came up with a proposed rule. Anytime you have an initiative, you need to set up the executive function, the administrative function of how you're going to implement it. And the governor refused to sign it. We now have another law that's been put together by the legislature, passed by the legislature, sitting waiting to see if the governor will sign it. There's no sense in sending it on to him if he's not going to sign it. This has created a great problem because basically those police officers who voted against 215 or who think it's not the law, it is, it's in the Health and Safety Code, it is the law, they have the right to arrest an individual who possesses marijuana and let the courts sort it out. And a number of law enforcement officials exercise that right, and the court attempts to sort it out. So it's not that there aren't any standards in California in terms of how much medicinal cannabis is the right amount, how many plants did you have. It's that every law enforcement official in the state has their own standard. So we have tens of thousands of standards rather than just one. Now, there have been some local entities, some cities and some counties that have said, okay, you can grow X number of plants or you can possess a certain number of ounces or pounds of cannabis for your own personal medicinal use. But it's still, I think, very hazy and vague as to what exactly the rules are, and far too many people who are sick end up having to waste money going to court to explain to the court about their illness.
Well, it just sounds very problematic to me for both patients and physicians, even out here in California, to be involved in medicinal marijuana. I mean, from the physician's side, though, can physicians out here can't write prescriptions for marijuana, can't? No, and I think that most of us that do make more than a handful of recommendations on the letters that we write indicating, hey, we talked, basically what you're saying is, I talked to the patient told me they had pain or they had seizures or they had attention deficit disorder and that cannabis helped them, and they asked me if I thought that there was any scientific basis for this. Was it their imagination or might there really be some scientific justification for it? And then if there is, as there is in those examples that I gave you, then I recommend or approve of their use. And the letter that they get sort of memorializing that discussion says this isn't a prescription. Mm-hmm. It's and the RAND Corporation, which is a very prestigious research institution, did a study on distribution, and that's really the problem, is that you've got over 24 states, or in some instances 36 states, and some they pass it and then they repeal it, that have approved the medicinal use of cannabis. But most of those states don't have a distribution system. 36 states
yes.
have approved
yes.
the medicinal use? I thought it was only 7 or 8.
The 7 or 8 that have done it by initiative. And they have tended to carry a little bit more weight because when the state legislatures have passed it, they've said, we've approved of this, and you just go and get that medicinal cannabis from the United States government. So as a practical matter, when the legislature says you have to get the cannabis from the United States government, and the United States government is unwilling to help sick people who are helped by an alternative and complementary medicine, that's not really available. And in the 7 states, 8 in the District of Columbia that have passed initiatives, as well as the state of Hawaii, where the state legislature was more aggressive on this, you do have greater legal protection in terms of the medicinal use of cannabis.
Pam Lichty, by the way, who's also a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, spearheaded the initiative in Hawaii, and she's been on Louisville Late Night several times, and just a little
Well, the interesting
aside
thing
there.
about the state of Wisconsin is that after the turn of the century, that is going from the 19th to 20th century, Wisconsin was the #1 hemp-growing state in the country, taking over from Kentucky. They used seed from Kentucky, but they were the largest hemp-producing state, and it was introduced to Wisconsin by a former governor of Wisconsin, Governor Rusk, who was the first United States Secretary of Agriculture. And somehow I find that just a tad ironical that the first United States Secretary of Agriculture was responsible for promoting the hemp crop in Wisconsin.
No kidding.
Yes.
So anyway, back to California, and would you briefly tell us some of the conditions? I know you just mentioned several in your own personal practice, in your own medical practice, where you have found medicinal marijuana truly therapeutic.
Well, pain certainly is the #1. And actually, in 1997, there was a National Neurological Association that had papers presented by researchers from 4 or 5 prominent universities, Minnesota, Texas, UCSF, Brown, and Michigan, I believe, talking about studies that have been done on pain. I think those studies were done with animals, but there have also been studies done with cannabis and with synthetic THC on pain. So we know that it's good for pain.
Chronic pain,
Chronic pain. People who have
arthritis, and
a lot of people with traumatic arthritis, a lot of people with back problems, people that have had multiple back surgeries, people that have been in serious automobile accidents. I've also had people that have been quadriplegic or paraplegic or paraplegic that have had spasticity along with their pain, and that found it very useful. And one of the things that people say who use cannabis for pain is they like it because it doesn't have the side effects of some of the prescription medication. That they find that they can function, that they can work with cannabis, whereas they cannot function, say, with Vicodin or with Demerol, which, as you know, are synthetic opiates.
I mean, have you found in your practice that cannabis actually replaces some of these more powerful, or is it a conjunct?
I've found both. When people with chronic pain, when they have severe pain, they will turn to the Demerol and the Vicodin. However, I've had some people who have taken very, very high doses of OxyContin, 180 milligrams, and they've dropped their dose to 35 milligrams as a result of combining it with cannabis. It's truly amazing. I mean, when you see people come in, and I've been practicing medicine long enough that I know these folks didn't all get together in the room and say, let's go in and give this bogus story to Dr. Bearman. It has authenticity, and people have told other doctors that they get relief. They have all kinds of medical records. I make sure that people have a well-documented history of the condition that they're talking about, and that they have attempted other more mainstream efforts to try to deal with the symptoms that they're suffering from. I think one of the patients that I had that was most impressive was an interesting woman, rather attractive lady in her mid-30s, came in with her boyfriend. Had, I think, been successful in the .com area. She was born with a congenital, what's called arteriovenous malformation in the brain. It's sort of extra blood vessels. And when she was in her teens, she had a hemorrhage. and a neurosurgeon came in, saved her life, but she did have some disability